In the year 1879, Native Americans lay in the crucible of the melting pot, America. It was an age of exploration, of change. Symptom of manifest destiny, man's journey into the uncertain West, was the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, the flagship of Native American academies across the United States. Native American assimilation was first initiated in the late 19th century when many tribal children began to attend government and church-operated boarding schools designed to offer better integration into the new yet pre-existing American culture.
Having been no pioneer in the field of cultural reconstruction, school founder Richard Henry Pratt served in the Southern Plains as captain of the 10th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers. It was during his service that Pratt's social beliefs regarding Native Americans evolved closer and closer to that of a prejudiced disposition, one savage, foreign of Eastern Euro-American nature. He kept at hand his principle that the Indian is born a blank like the rest of us. It would be an age in which more than 30,000 native children would be pulled across the very continent they once called home in order to be taught how to be the equals of Americans.
In the year 1879, Captain Richard Henry Pratt successfully founded the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, the first federally funded off-reservation Native American boarding school. Located in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, what were once prison barracks, were utilized to construct an institute of education and cultural rehabilitation. As Carlisle and its sister academies grew throughout the United States, Native American culture quickly found itself being burned alive. Pratt was ordered by the U.S. War Department to travel to Dakota Territory and recruit native Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota children whose educational statuses would be opportune for rehabilitation.
These tribes were selected because of their growing opposition to U.S. outreach and failed Indian agents who sought negotiation. In his meeting with the Brule Lakota chief, Chief Spotted Tail, Pratt expressed,
"You intend to let your children remain in the same condition of ignorance in which you have lived, which will compel them always to meet the whiter man at a great disadvantage through an interpreter as you have to do? As your friend, I urge you to send your children with me to this Carlisle school, and I will do everything I can to advance them in intelligence and industry in order that they may come back and help you." Life at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School was a severe and foreign experience for its students, as mere children below the age of 18 were separated from their beloved families and cultures. Upon their first arrival to Carlisle, students were introduced to chalkboards, as scrawled before them were the assembly of random symbols, at which time they were told to give up their tribal names for ones rather of the English language. Promptly after selecting new names, students were involuntarily cut of their hair, given starched uniforms, and trained to march in place. Having been born in the last traditional days of the Oglala Lakota tribe, student and Carlisle poster child Luther Standing Bear wrote,
"Whites believed the Indian children could not be civilized while wearing moccasins and blankets. Their hair was cut because in some mysterious way, long hair stood in the path of our development. They were issued the clothes of white men. High-collared, stiff-bosomed shirts and suspenders fully 3 inches in width were uncomfortable. White leather boots caused actual suffering."
Pratt's educational officials within Carlisle were found by the students to be acutely strict of rules and regulations, responding with harsh disciplinary tactics when broken. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School maintained a guardhouse as a placement for punishment, frequently in setting students into isolation. Students found it to be intensely difficult to comprehend and trust the accuracy of information teachers supplied to them, doubting the Victorian morality the school assessed.
One day, an astronomer came to the school and gave us a talk and explained that there would be an eclipse of the moon that following Wednesday at night at 12 o'clock. We did not believe it. When the moon eclipsed, we readily believed our teacher about geography and astronomy,"
wrote Standing Bear, recalling his academics. Pratt, citing his various outlets during his military service, believed it was apt and even therapeutic for students to be taught a variety of trades and practical skills, those having been agriculture, carpentry, printing, and cooking. Well considered the face of American athletics and willpower, Sac and Fox native Jim Thorpe attended Carlisle at age 16, his participation in sports having included track and field, baseball, football, lacrosse, and even ballroom dancing. Thorpe competed in and won the U.S. gold in both the decathlon and pentathlon races during the 1912 Olympics. His image stamped upon Carlisle is one rare, even hopeful in its light.
Despite participation in athletics having been highly encouraged, it was not required. Some students instead took classes that studied the arts, these having been music and drawing. Aiming to mask or replace their representation, teachers ridiculed the students' traditional values as lessons were often geared toward assimilating students to pieces of modern and European art forms. This taught students to remain silent of writing and further sharing their Native American expressions. Daily life, their very simple life, at Carlisle conjured an intangible murky effect. The self-esteem and self-image of students, their very native culture, was blinded in the smoke of a different world. Native American academies weakened the cultures of tribes, influencing the course of their very existence. Toward the end of the Great Sioux War and Native negotiation, the 1890s led to the collapse of Native stronghold in America.
When federally funded reservation schools increased throughout the United States, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School slowly began to diminish in its significance. Entering the first decades of the 20th century weekly, it was no longer deemed imperative for children to travel expensive fares to academies when they could now attend newly funded public schools that were simply more convenient. When Superintendent Richard Henry Pratt began to face the pressure of faculty debates from both the Indian Commission and the U.S. Army, rumors began to spread regarding the closing of the school. Subsequently, a congressional investigation narrowed in on the school's dying management over commercialized athletics. In the year 1918, the American flag was lowered for its last time at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, as students were sent home or transferred to other off-reservation boarding schools.
Inevitably, students wrote that they returned home as white men. It was for most students that the return home was met with rejected handshakes and denied eye contact, as well as the painful memories and mental illnesses that went on to participate forever in their minds, through cognitive distortion, depression, anxiety, nightmares. It was a return home to outcasting, isolation unlike any other. As for those who could not return home, more than 180 gravestones lay at rest before Carlisle. The called white man's disease, primarily tuberculosis, claimed the lives of hundreds of students at the school whose bodies, for most deaths, were not returned to the families. Some were buried, others cremated, in the land of an unfamiliar people.
Carlisle was the landscape of a terrible genocide, a cultural genocide, one written in the blood and tears of mothers, fathers, and children. Despite having been promised cultural rehabilitation, Native Americans were thrown into the crucible of the melting pot, America. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School composed the perfect American tragedy, the robbery of a people and of a livelihood.